Some of the biggest stones on the planet aren't sitting in quarries, they're holding up temples, palaces, and entire ancient cities. These are blocks so massive, modern engineers still have no clue how they are moved or lifted. These are stones so large, modern cranes still can't lift them. At the base of the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek, Lebanon, are 3 limestone blocks that are famous for how insanely huge they are. They're called the Trilithon Blocks. Each one is around 64 feet long, over 14 feet high, and weighs somewhere between 750 to 800 tons. And they aren't just sitting on the ground. Somehow these things had been placed about 20 feet up in a retaining wall. Even today, with all the technology we have, lifting a single one of these stones would be a major challenge. For comparison, the strongest cranes in the world, like the Liebherr LR 13000, can lift around 3,000 tons, but that's under perfect controlled conditions and usually with smaller sized loads. Getting a 800-ton stone hoisted and placed precisely the way the Romans did it is still not something that could be done casually or quickly today. Most experts think the stones were cut from a nearby quarry slightly uphill and then moved into place using a combination of levers, rollers, and dirt ramps. There's no official blueprint for how it happened though, but the stones are there and they've been sitting solidly in place for nearly 2,000 years. No one has moved them since. Also in Lebanon is the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It still sits in the quarry near the Temple of Jupiter, and it's even heavier than the Trilithon Blocks. Measures about 68 feet long, 14 feet wide, and weighs about 1,000 tons. To this day, no one has moved it. It cracked during or after quarrying, so it was never transported, but it's not the only one like this. There are even larger stones still buried nearby, including one estimated to weigh over 1,600 tons. The name Stone of the Pregnant Woman comes from a local legend. The story goes that a pregnant woman promised to move it if people fed her until she gave birth, which obviously didn't happen. That's where the name comes from. It has nothing to do with the stone's real purpose. Researchers believe the block was intended for the same platform as the Trilithon stones, but the crack probably made it unusable. What's crazy is that these stones were cut so precisely, skillfully, that even today, it's not fully clear how they planned to move them without modern equipment. Next up is the Stone of the South. This one's even bigger than the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, around 19.5 to 20.5 meters long, or about 4.3 to 4.5 meters high and wide, and roughly 1,242 tons. That's heavier than anything the Romans actually moved. It's still sitting in the quarry untouched. People think it might have cracked or just proved way too big to move. It's just a few hundred meters from where the Trilithon and Pregnant Woman stones were quarried. Again, it was probably going to the same place, but something stopped the Romans from finishing the job. Some modern cranes can technically lift around 1,200 tons, but again, that's under perfect conditions. For starters, you'd want the ground to be flat. This stone is half buried, it's tilted, nowhere near ready to be lifted. Even if you could attach a cable, just getting a crane into that uneven quarry and setup would probably be a nightmare, probably harder than the lift itself. And just when you think Baalbek couldn't possibly have anything bigger, I promise this whole list isn't just from this one place, but archaeologists dug around in 2014 and found an even larger stone sitting right beneath the already massive Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This third monolith, often called the Forgotten Stone, weighs in at about 1,650 tons. That is over 3.3 million pounds. It's about 64 feet long, 20 feet wide, and 18 feet high. To this day, it's considered the largest known stone ever carved by humans. And again, it looks like the builders started cutting it out and then just stopped. The entire underside is still connected to the bedrock. There are no wedge holes, no signs it was ever even close to being moved. That's raised a ton of questions, pun very much intended. Really, it's just one question: why did they abandon the project? but I had to make the pun. But this thing was hidden under centuries of debris, and since it's still attached to the quarry floor, we don't actually know what their plan was. Next up is the unfinished obelisk in Egypt. This granite giant is still attached to the bedrock in its quarry in Aswan. If it had been completed, it would have stood about 137 feet tall and weighed roughly 1,160 to 1,200 tons, which is around 2.3 to 2.6 million pounds. The Egyptians were carving it during Queen Hatshepsut's reign, but once cracks appeared, they abandoned the project. Today, you could still clearly see the tool marks and even the holdups where workers used harder stone balls to chip it out. Why is it still here? Well, it was never finished or detached. Maybe they were just too ambitious and realized there was just no way they were going to lug that thing out of there. Next on the list, we have the Thunderstone. So this massive rock was dug out of a swamp near the Gulf of Finland in the 1700s, and it ended up as the base of the famous bronze horseman statue in St. Petersburg. Originally, it weighed around 1,500 tons, about 3.3 million pounds. It was trimmed down to about 1,250 tons during the move, but even then, it was still one of the heaviest objects ever moved by humans without modern machinery. It's made of something called Rapakivi granite, which is a specific type of granite found mostly in that region. Looks a bit different from regular granite. It has large round crystals that kind of pop out, and it's known for breaking apart more easily. That crumbly texture made carving and shaping the stone risky, so they had to be extra careful not to crack it during the move. I mean, imagine a chunk from a stone that weighs thousands of tons falling on you. Yeah, moving it was quite a risk. Around 400 workers dragged it more than 3.5 miles over swampy ground using ball bearings under wooden rails to roll it forward. Would have been very slow. After that, they floated it across the Neva River. The move took nearly 2 years. Next up, we have the Colossi of Memnon, two massive stone statues that have been sitting in the Egyptian desert for over 3,000 years. No one's quite sure how the ancient builders managed this. Each one is around 60 feet tall, about a 6-story building, and weighs about 720 tons. Now, 720 tons, like, that sounds light now compared to the other entries on the list, but that's still about 1.4 million pounds. I mean, I can't even wrap my head around numbers that big. They were carved from single blocks of quartzite sandstone, and they weren't carved locally. A type of stone comes from a quarry near Cairo, which is over 400 miles away. So this would have been like dragging a skyscraper-sized boulder across the desert. They were originally part of a massive mortuary temple for Pharaoh Imhotep III, but most of that complex has been lost to time. Interestingly, for centuries, the northern statue was reported to sing at dawn, a kind of whistling or humming sound. Ancient Greeks and Romans actually traveled there just to hear it. Scientists think it had something to do with temperature shifts and cracks in the stone, but it's still eerie how consistent the reports were. What's left of Ramesses II's statue is just the broken pieces, but even those are ridiculously huge. The fallen torso alone weighs around 1,000 tons and would have stood around 60 feet tall when it was still upright. It used to stand outside the Ram Museum, a giant temple complex built by Ramesses II, who ruled Egypt for 66 years and basically made everything in his name as big as possible. Because why not if you're in that position? The statue is carved from a single piece of granite, which didn't come from Luxor, it came from Aswan, nearly 110 miles away. There's desert, rocky terrain, and the Nile between those two spots. Archaeologists think the statue may have been broken during an earthquake, but there's also evidence that it was intentionally dismantled by rulers who came later or looters who used the pieces for building material. Still, craftsmanship is insane. The carving is so precise, you could still make out details of the face and headdress, even with chunks missing. There's also debate about how they even stood this thing up in the first place, considering it's heavier than anything we can move whole today. Inside the Western Wall tunnels in Jerusalem is a stone that's somehow both easy to miss and absolutely massive. It's about 45 feet long, 11 feet high, and estimated to be around 6.5 feet thick, which puts its weight somewhere between 550,000 and 660,000 pounds. So it makes it even crazier that it's not just lying around, it's fitted perfectly into the wall, right in the middle of a row of huge stones stacked with barely any gaps between them. It's part of what's called the Great Course, which is a set of foundation stones from the time of King Herod over 2,000 years ago. These were placed without mortar. They were just perfect cuts holding everything together. Some of the joints are so tight you can't even fit a sheet of paper between them. Nobody knows exactly how they did this, but the theory is they used wooden rollers and levers. Even now, the stone is in such a tight underground spot that it wasn't properly measured until the 80s using ground-penetrating radar. The Dolmen of Menga, one of the oldest and most impressive prehistoric engineering projects in Europe. Built around 5,700 years ago, it's made of 32 stones, with the biggest weighing over 150 tons. People actually dug these stones out, dragged them nearly half a mile, and stacked them by hand, probably over hundreds of years. The biggest ones come from a nearby hillside. Instead of rolling them on logs, like you often hear about, they slid them across packed dirt using wooden sleds and stone tracks. So they basically built temporary roads. Archaeologists even found grooves in the ground where the sleds were dragged. Inside, the stones weren't just dumped into place. The ones standing upright lean in slightly, which helps them hold up the heavy ceiling stones without everything caving in. All that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.